Hello, I'm Joseph Hooker. I'm a data science major at UCSD and an aspiring engineer in graphics programming.
So you have some straight away. You have something to show us.
Yeah. I have a Toon shader I've been working on for a couple of months now. Uh, its goals are to essentially allow for uh, rapid customizability and iteration while achieving an aesthetic that is similar to the sort of the Arc Systems uh, tune shader that was talked about on their GDC talk back in 2015, as well as a few other visual inspirations. The main goal here being like um, allowing the user to create a tune shader that has very refined uh, and has a very refined aesthetic uh, catered to what they want to do with it. Um, and so I've implemented things like a customizable light ramp that uses a serialized gradient, uh, smoothest parameters for all types of lighting that occur on the object, parallax occlusion mapping, um, and stylistic uh, shading techniques that like bands and dots and splashing.
So I caught the aspiring part.
Mhm.
Aspiring, what did you say? Aspiring engineer, aspiring game developer.
Yeah,
So what about that? What like what about that is aspirational as opposed to not actually what you're doing right now?
right. I suppose it's more of just uh, a mental note that I have of myself of like um, what I feel is an engineer and the ways that I need to go in order to get there. Uh, the main thing for me before was that like I'm not technically making any kind of money or any kind of like presence with my engineering, but that's changed due to like a deal that I've made with Microsoft for a game that I'm developing, as well as just becoming more skilled over the years. Uh, but yeah, sometimes I do kind of just downplay anything that I've ever done ever in favor of just seeing myself as a student.
So I mean, we're gonna immediately go sort of off the rails of what we had talked about
Mm.
uh, preparing here. But my question is, you know, you do you think that there is a there like there is a point at which you're going to say, you know what, I have made it. I've learned enough. I'm not aspiring to something greater.
Right. Um, I'm not really. I don't know if there is a there. I'd like to think that I have a there, and sometimes it changes, but um, I would say that if there was one, it would just be uh, releasing this project that I'm working on, this game, or uh, doing something uh, that I feel is notable in my eyes based on everything that I've seen while I've been like studying, um, like making a product that is distinctive in what it accomplishes and is something that I am proud of, like on a very real level. But I don't know, maybe that's just a goalpost that I'm moving sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to dig into this one a little bit because it's a tough, um, you know, I think it's easy to get into a really vicious cycle here of beating yourself up, right,
Right.
over time. And you know, I think it's okay to be aspiring to be better. That's always
Right.
okay. And so in a sense, you're always the person that's aspiring to be the better version of you,
Yeah.
right? So is that goalpost moving? Yes, of course it is. And it's moving indefinitely until you die. Um,
Yes.
and that that's also okay. But what that shouldn't take away from the things that sort of that slightly less skilled version of you from yesterday accomplished, right, with the skills that they had yesterday.
Right.
So yeah, I guess, you can't hold the standard, the person that you were yesterday against the standard of tomorrow. Like that's not going to work,
Mhm.
and it's just going to drive you nuts, frankly.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think with this work that you're doing now, there's going to be a day, and given how fast you seem to be learning, probably not in too distant future, there's going to be a day where you look at what you're doing now and you're going to say, this is some hot garbage.
Mhm.
And it's okay, like that's going to be okay for you to think that on that day, but it's not okay to say I was, I'm not proud of what I did with what I had at the time, right?
Mhm.
So don't let that aspiration take away from the accomplishments of the moment.
Yeah,
Right.
you gotta celebrate the steps along the journey. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
and what you do and what you've done is just building you up for the future, right? But you always have to celebrate. Hey, I'm doing something kind of cool here. You know.
Right.
So Ray, I think you had a question.
Yeah, well, it was on the question of aspiring, like it's the same thing, aspiring game developer, aspiring graphics engineer, or whatever. Um, like, where is the source of inspiration coming from? Like, how did you even get started in doing this stuff, being interested in these topics? Like, what's the origin story?
Right. Um, as far as like engineering goes, I guess I started with an interest in engineering specifically for games and art. Um, when uh, when I was in like gaming modding communities. Um, when I was like a kid, I would like frequent them in like IRC chats and very very niche forums, uh, and I got to like take a glimpse into like the actual process of game development from the perspective of someone who's modifying something, and I always thought that that was very interesting. And then eventually I got into it myself, and that kind of led me on the path to uh, engineering my own games. Um, and so I've kind of just like I started as kind of a viewer into a very very uh, niche and hacky section of the gaming community, and kind of just slowly worked my way up to like appreciating the craft itself, and wanting to be able uh, to operate in that space and to help others achieve what they want to do with their vision.
So let's start with, you can unshare the screen, I think, at this point,
Yeah.
unless there's something else you want to show. Um, what let's dig into that experience as in the modding community a little bit more.
Mhm.
What is it that like what work the actual thing that you did
Mhm.
there, what was it that really captured you, where you're like, this is what I want to do?
Right. Um, I guess the ingenuity of a lot of the engineers that were in the bonding communities of like uh, trying their best to like disassemble uh, this piece of art that they appreciated and figure out how it works so that they could add their own self to it. I always thought was very very interesting and aspirational, as like as like someone who likes to work with math and someone who likes to work with logic, like the process of like taking something apart and then building it back up in a way that makes it kind of you're a part of you too, um, was always very interesting to me. And as I kind of saw more and more of that, I grew an interest in helping people do that and helping people achieve what they wanted to with what they were doing.
So it's like it's sort of that hacker meets remix kind of uh kind of kind of expression, like
Yeah.
um yeah. So I think that I mean, that shows clearly in the example that you just showed,
Mhm.
um, I want to take this idea that I was inspired by. I want to figure out how to take these pieces that I have in front of me and sort of remix them a little bit and maybe put them back together in a slightly different way so that I can get that look. So then I can change it and allow other people to change it. So there's one thing that I'm wondering, like in terms of the connection between those two things, like what you want to do is, you say you want to sort of let other people be able to um, express themselves through that shader in particular. Like I want to build a thing that looks like this. So are you, are you giving them that same um, that same sort of remix modding opportunity, or is it much more, or do you feel like it's much more your audience there, the audience that you're thinking about isn't really looking for that, and it's sort of, you're looking for a much more sort of curated experience where it's just, I know what I want, I just need a fast way of getting it.
Right. I mean, the goal would, the high level pie in the sky goal for me would be to be able to kind of capture both through how I design the shader and how I design the code behind the shader. So like a big part of this for me is dividing the code up in such a way that like someone can very easily look at my code base and look at the way that's organized, and then from that be able to modify it if they wanted to, and get more interesting results than what is featured already. But at the end of the day, I also want to be able to give this resource to like someone who maybe isn't experienced with shader code, or maybe doesn't feel confident enough in their knowledge of like HLSL or something, and be able to still modify the parameters that I give them in order to make their own look. Um, and so like to that end, like I also want to add like shader graph support if I can, and kind of open up as many avenues to modification as is possible with my tool.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a good segue into um, what do you sort of see as your um, as the role of engineering
Right.
for you?
For me, yeah. So for me, I feel that as an engineer, my job should be to uh, create a platform for artists to realize their visions for their projects, and uh, create tools for them that allow them to uh, achieve what they're actually looking for without having to make as many compromises as they might have without the tools that I make.
So, what kind of compromises do you think that they're making now that they shouldn't have to make?
Uh, well, I think like one of the major problems in the industry right now is just working. Uh, a lot of artists are having to produce a ton of textures and a ton of models just to be able to keep up with the rising standard that's happening in the game industry. And so part of what I want to do is allow artists to shift towards more of a role like a curator rather than an actual producer, using technologies like machine learning and different data science techniques to leverage computation in the art process and allow the workload to ease a bit.
Um, like on that note, like some artists out there see the rise of machine learning and generative content as on one hand, yes, it lowers the burden of work that needs to be done, but on the other hand, some of them see it as putting them out of a job.
Right.
So like what's your thoughts on that, and how do you think about that?
Right. Well, I've always held the opinion that uh, a game is only really ever as good as the visions behind it, and I don't think that a computer really has that much of a ability to really capture like an actual motive, an actual design, an actual inspiration. behind something. And so the best that we'll ever be able to do at the moment is just be able to perform a task that a human can under a very, very large set of parameters. Um, and so the role of the computer, as it has always been, is to compute tasks based on input. And to that end, a game that is made using only AI for art is probably not a very good one. Just from a pure uh, visual standard standpoint of uh, what an artist provides is more than just their ability to draw things. It is their eyes, it is their experiences, it is their ability to create things and create an artistic vision that is consistent and uh, can be seen throughout the project. And a computer can't do that. And a computer shouldn't do that. And so part of what we need to do as engineers is first make it clear that that's not our intention to do that, and second, make sure that what the tools that we're making are ethical and that they aren't being used in a way that exploits kind of the what artists are doing now in order to maybe cut costs or something, even though even the process of doing that would never give a good result, even if you have a large supercomputer funded by Google or something.
So, uh, yeah, I mean, let's break into this topic then.
Yeah.
Um, the sort of ethics of tools development. Where do you think that? How does that fit in here? Like, where do you think the what questions do people need to be able to answer in order to reason about uh, the ethics of what they're doing from your point of view?
Right. I mean, I think like one of the first questions that you need to ask when you're making a tool is like, what's the worst thing that someone could do with this? And if you aren't really willing to answer that question, then you probably shouldn't be making it. Right. Like I feel like a great example of that is deepfakes, right? Like it started as a pretty novel concept of like, let's take an image of a face and try to encode that in such a way that we can then transpose that on another person's face. Um, and that's a pretty innocent concept, I guess. But if you aren't willing to ask, well, what would someone do with this if they were just kind of the worst, right? Is is very very important when you're operating in this space. And so because those kinds of questions were either not asked or ignored, we are now in an age where uh, there's a lot of exploitation happening, and there's a lot of uh, kind of malicious bad faith actors operating with very easily accessible uh, image processing neural networks that can do these kind of things. And it's causing a lot of issues for a lot of people. Um, and so kind of our job as data scientists is to really, really think about like, what does it mean to act in bad faith? And how do we account for bad faith actors when we're producing things that are open source?
Okay. So what do you do with the answer to that question? Or what would you expect someone to do with the answer to that question? So in the case of, at the end of the day, you can, many things are ultimately just a variation on a compiler,
Yeah.
right? Like you turn something from something into something else. And can a compiler be, what's the worst thing you could do with a compiler? Well, basically anything you can imagine doing with a computer.
Right.
So, what do we do with that answer?
I mean, I think it widely depends on what is happening, but I would say like a good first step is just to, um, if you're making a powerful model, limit who has access to it, right? Like don't just leave the door open and say, here's this pretty complex model that can do a lot of interesting things, go wild, right? Like with what GPT did when they released the smaller the smaller models to the public, uh, instead of like the giant model that they had used to actually get the results that they talked about in their papers. I think that is a pretty good first step. Um, a good second step would just be figuring out ways to maybe account for uh, these kind of attacks. So, like, for instance, if you are doing a deep fake and you wanted to release an app to the public, you maybe would want to like have uh, a reserved encoding of like famous people, for instance, and then like say, okay, if we see a famous person here, let's just not compute it for that person, and then they have to actually go out of their way to make a model that does that for them, right? Just kind of like the more we can restrict the uh, the powers to people that can actually be held accountable, like researchers and scientists that are actually funded by universities and have to abide by some kind of ethics code. I think the better, right now at least. Um, just because like we're we're evolving the field at a rate that I don't think can be controlled very well, and so any kind of uh, lid we can put on it to stop uh, the overflowing garbage that is flowing out whenever something is released that is any kind of powerful is a good thing.
So it sounds like at some level, um, it's about the sort of cost of weaponization.
Yeah,
If it's a very high cost to weaponize, then it's less of a um, uh, there's less, basically less individual accountability there. Like you're
yeah,
releasing a compiler, the cost of that weaponizing that is reasonably high. But if I'm releasing basically a button that can clearly be used to abuse people,
yeah,
then and anyone can do that, then that's
right,
very low cost weaponized.
yeah,
And then your accountability goes up. So that seems like what I hear from what you're saying is sort of like that's proportional to the cost of weaponization.
yeah,
All right. I mean, I think that's a very succinct answer and something that people should be able to consider. Um, I I mean, I think this takes us to the topic, back to the topic of the role of ML and in the sort of our curation process. And my question is the less than the generative aspect, but more the discovery part. How do you know? How do you solve the problem of it generate a million different things, infinite variety of things, and I'm just not overwhelmed with the variety? How do I know how do I narrow that scope?
right. Um, I think probably one of the best approaches that I can come up with is essentially introducing a second neural network or a second um, type of machine learning algorithm that can that tries its best to refine the space that generative um, the generative network works in by observing the selections that you make of a diverse set that it provides you, right? So kind of like an iterative process where as you select more things, it refines parameters of what is acceptable to show you. Um, and so the curation starts to become better, it starts to become quicker, and you're starting to see more things that you want to see until you arrive at like an array of images that uh, is good enough to uh, curate and iterate on.
Right. So that's, I mean, basically that's like an individual taste category, right?
Right.
Is this something I think would be tasteful or not?
Mhm.
And so do we, if we look at, say, Amazon book recommendation, like I think you would want to read this book, or, the equivalent kind of thing.
Right.
How successful do you think we have been generally at that exact thing, like curating, like being able to model taste?
Right. Um, I think we've been it's interesting because like on one hand, we like if you were like buy a product on Amazon a couple of times, then Amazon would like uh, assume that like this is your favorite product, and it would start trying to recommend it to you more, regardless of what that product is. Like if you were like to buy like uh, three items in like the toiletry and personal hygiene category, then it would just keep recommending to you anything that's in that category, right? Which is probably problematic in like the context of like that's probably not what a user wants to see. But in terms of like figuring out what it is that you're buying, that's pretty intuitive to like be able to take these disparate products and then combine them into a vector set that represents uh, a line of products, right? Classification. Um, so I think we're pretty good at classification of like of seemingly related items into categories, and with the advent of new technologies every week, it's getting better and better. Um, but uh, I'm not sure if we're at the point where we can define artistic style per se in such a way that we get uh, a like a solid understanding of like art principles that allows the search domain to be super refined. But as long as we can get it to a point where we can get broad strokes of like very uh, distinct categories that are easier to identify and um, help uh, take the search space down to orders of magnitude smaller, I think is a good thing and something that is achievable with our current technologies. And so I think we're not we're not where we could be, but we're certainly at a point where we can start making good progress towards that end.
So it's interesting that you used the word understanding in that.
Mhm.
What do you think the role of sort of defensible models is? Where we can, we can backtrack that to some source of, steps, how I could come to the same conclusion.
Mhm. Um, hmm. I mean, I guess it's. Oh God, I lost my train of thought. Could you repeat the question, please?
No, no worries.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what the role of, when we talk about ML, there's usually, there's often two camps, and especially when we're thinking about, the starkest area, things around medical space, right?
Right.
Where you don't want a sort of black box that just says, "Hey, you have cancer."
Yeah.
What you want is either to give a medical professional a hint, like, hey, you might want to look here,
Right.
or you want a totally defensible position. The certain machine saw this and that was interesting because of X and Y and Z, and sort of backtracks that
Right.
defensibility. So does that fit in? Is there any?
Right. I think one of the major things that can be done to alleviate kind of that black box is to have the reasoning be the output, right? Instead of having the answer be the output. So like in the instance of like of image of like a artistic style quantification, right? Instead of saying, oh, here are the images, it could say, oh, here are the parameters, and then here are the parameters I'm using to refine the image set, and this is the image set, right? Like having the justification be in the output rather than just the answer is, I think, um, a good step, or just having the justification be kind of a step in a series of networks, right? Where you start with the input, and then you get the justifications, and the justifications are then fed to another node network that gives you the output. And like defining certain discrete steps that we can then refer to when we're looking at the answer uh, within the entire network itself, uh, showing showing the uh, showing certain sections in in the decision-making process as quantifiable things that are humanly understandable, and forcing the neural network to uh, sort of sort of tell us what it's doing as it's doing it uh, within the training process.
Uh, yeah, Ray, did you have a question? Something you want to jump in on?
No, I was interested in, like, machine learning is definitely not my forte at all, right? But other than artist creation and generation of assets, like, how where are some of the other cases where you see machine learning could be useful uh in the realm that you're dealing with like shaders and in graphics engineering? Like, how where else can you can apply all of this knowledge, do you think?
Right. I mean, in terms of like shaders, I know that Facebook has like been doing some pretty interesting stuff with um, like learning based like algorithms that can do heuristic analysis of code. And applying something like that to shader code could be potentially pretty helpful because that's one of the areas where it's kind of the hardest to debug, just because of like the space that you're operating in and not having a lot of tools that can like actually do a lot of the helpful things that like standard IDEs do. Um,
Mm,
so having like a heuristic analysis of like shader code of like, oh, uh, this loop isn't going to be unwrapped the way that you want it to, or this variable that you're setting here is going to cause a potential issue here due to computational errors that's gonna make it outside the domain of this function that you're doing. Would be pretty helpful in terms of like uh, debugging shader code. In terms of like stuff like um, actual art, like 3D models and textures, um, I think I would really be interested in seeing uh, generative networks um, for 3D models, specifically with structures like man-made structures. I think have an opportunity uh, a pretty easy to understand thing for a neural network just because of um, how constrained that human man-made structures are by just physics in general and just the design sensibilities and the rigidness of the models themselves. And so I would be very interested to see um, what we're capable of in terms of like uh, generative 3D models for for like replicating man-made structures and like trying to see what a a generative model can what a generative model thinks are the core components of the man-made structure, because that also provides a lot of insight into like patterns that maybe we haven't seen. Because at the end of the day, that's what a neural network is designed to do. It's designed to find patterns. Um, yeah.
So there's a lot that I would like to unwrap in that, but
Mm.
in the interest of time, let's let's go to back to the unusual sort of art space that you chose for yourself, um,
Mm.
and that you've been working most in, and uh, I'd like to know sort of a little bit about what your goals were there, and so why are you operating in this space?
Right. Um, I'm mainly operating in like the space of like uh, non like PBR high fidelity uh, shaders and art, mainly just to challenge myself. Um, I feel like working in unique and uh, weirder art spaces allows more opportunities for problems that I may not run into if I was just working in a standard uh, PBR system. Just mainly due to the fact that uh, the more obscure something is, the less that there is to just like look up and find the answer to. Um, like it's hard to like quantify how to make a 3D thing look like it was uh, produced and drawn into the in such a way that you can just like immediately get like an answer on Stack Overflow or something. Like the the problem space is very abstract in a way of like um, the what you need to do isn't obvious and is very much um, in some cases just a matter of personal taste. And so being able to operate in these spaces and find my own solutions to problems, I think is really good for like just building up my skills as an engineer. Um, and it helps me um, get to, I guess, a point where I feel like I'm able to take on challenges and figure out how to problem solve uh, in my own way and in a way that is quick and based on experiences that are uh, challenging.
Did you have some goal in mind with that sort of like that building up your skill process?
I mean, at the end of the day, my goal is to uh, my goal is to be able to tackle unique challenges and um, be skilled enough to kind of innovate in my own way and um, move, uh, I guess, move forward and move the kind of space that I'm working in forward and like make a meaningful contribution to like the field of graphics programming or the fields of data science using like operating in a space that still uh, provides what I'm interested in working on, which is art, of elevating artists and um, providing them with tools that help them get to where they want to be with their projects.
So let's end with this because I'd like to know um, how you know ultimately that that you've made a meaningful contribution.
Right. Um, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever know, but I'd like to think that uh, I would know if I'd made a meaningful contribution uh, by the the way that what I've done is used by other people, right? So if I were to make something and then that thing I can see in other people's work, then I feel like that is a contribution. Uh, um, so like essentially creating creating a concept or a process that generates its own legacy through other engineers and other people.
That's a good answer. Or well, Joseph, thanks for joining us today. It was really good meeting you.
Yeah.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. So
Au revoir.
there we go. That's it. That's it. That's the end.